All right, so this is the Bible study for Matthew chapter 18, verses 6 through 9. And the text for today says, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck, and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come, but woe to the person through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with one eye than have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell." All right, so that's some good, positive, encouraging stuff. That's the one they put on Caleb, I'm sure, all the time. So number one in our Bible study, remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive, and so that you can follow along with us. So number one says, what did we talk about in the last Bible study in 18:1 through 5? And I think this is significant because honestly, I think sometimes we take 6 through 9 sort of in a vacuum out of context. And I think within the context of 18:1 through 5, I think it gives it maybe not different meaning, but maybe additional meaning. So I think that's important. So A, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? We definitely talked about that. B, becoming like little children, but not childish, the opposite. C, welcoming the outcast into the circle, yes. And D, caring more about connecting with those who are outside the circle than being the most important one in the circle. That attitude usually leads you to ignore those of lower status. In other words, if all I care about is my own status within the circle, I'm going to hang out with other people of good status, which causes me to ignore those of a lesser status, those on the outside looking in, which is the opposite of what Jesus was saying. So Jesus was trying to say, you need to stop caring so much about your own status and pay attention to the fact that the most important people to me are the people that are right now outside of the circle or outside of the kingdom. Which, by the way, we're still not to verse 10, which is the parable of the wandering sheep. Um, so, yeah, I think it's no coincidence that that is next. I think that he is speaking about one sort of continuous thing as he's talking through these 3 sections that we're talking about separately. So number 2 says, what is Jesus talking about now, according to 18:6? A, little ones. He obviously says one of these little ones, so he's talking about that. But maybe not actually little ones like children. He was using children as a metaphor. So B, he is still using children as a metaphor. So in the previous text, in the first 5 verses, we understood that the children are a metaphor, that when Jesus reaches out and finds a little child that's playing, calls him to him and puts him sort of into their circle, and circle is a metaphor too, but into their discussion, into the midst of them, then that is a metaphor. He's not actually talking about children, and he's not actually talking about their conversation. He is bringing a child into their conversation and say, that's what it should look like in the kingdom of heaven, that we should be willing to call somebody who is outside of the conversation, bring them in, and consider them the most important here, not worry about how important we are. And if he was talking about them before, then when he says, and if anyone causes one of these little ones to stumble, those who believe in me, then isn't he still not talking about children? Although children are those outside the circle too sometimes, so I'm not saying don't apply this to children, but I'm saying he's not only applying, and maybe not even primarily applying this to children. Children's pastors love this. They're like, don't cause one of these little ones to stumble. But I'm not sure that he's primarily talking about children here, although children are included in the group that he's talking about. He's still using a metaphor. C, not causing outcasts or those who are being brought into the circle to stumble. So if the little one is the person that was outside, that was so important to Jesus that he brought them in, then what he's talking about is somebody who has been brought from the outside to the inside. So a new believer, perhaps, or somebody of low position who Jesus cares about so much that he would bring him in. And then D, some scary thoughts about a millstone, and this is actually, I think sometimes it rolls off the tongue so much when we've been in the church for so long, but it is scary. It should be scary. What he's saying is that if you think that it's so important. I feel like he almost starts to lecture his disciples about this. If you think it's so important how much you are recognized and how important you are, that you don't understand that the person that's most important to me is out there, then I don't know what you're about to do when I reach out and bring this person in, because you may ignore them, treat them badly, do something that makes them feel unwelcome, and cause them to stumble. And if you do that, then you don't need to worry about how important you are in the kingdom anymore, because honestly, it'd be better for you if the millstone was tied around your neck and you were thrown into the depths of the sea. And I think he is trying to scare us. He is trying to make it a big deal and show us what a big deal it is that we are so consumed with ourselves that we don't think about those around us and how we're impacting them. And that's what Jesus really cares about. That's what Jesus cares about more and more than who is the most influential within the circle. And I honestly think the reason he uses such a sort of drastic metaphor, makes a drastic statement, is because he's trying to wake them up to how far off their thinking is. And let me just say that that's not new, and it hasn't gone away either, that there's this tendency in the church for us to just sort of elbow for position in the church and be more concerned about what the denominational leadership thinks of me than about what lost people think of me or our church. I have to report numbers, and I have to report all this stuff, and somebody, it drives me nuts. If somebody wants to know how Sandia is doing or how good a pastor I am, they just do like this, and they peck on the keyboard a little bit, and they pull up all of my reports, and they decide whether I'm a good pastor or not. That's true. That's what people do, and I know that is not the real measure of how good a pastor I am. And I know that not a single person that does like this and pulls up my reports can really tell how I've impacted the outsider. And our numbers don't always reflect. Our numbers don't even show. And so pastors have to often choose which is most important to them in planning our ministries. Now, I could plan our ministries in such a way that our numbers look good, and we don't have an impact on the people that Jesus cares about most. Or I could plan our ministries around the people that Jesus cares about most and hope that somebody figures out that the numbers don't always reflect it. And that's the decision I'm left with. Now, we could poo-poo denominational numbers or whatever. You can do that. That's fine, but that's not what I'm doing. I want to be clear. I make it fun, but I want to be clear that it's not just about denominational numbers and pastors. The truth is that all of us have those sorts of decisions to make in our life. Um, we got to decide, how do I look, what matters most to me? Is it how I look among in worldly sort of ways of measuring? Because some of us try to please the rulers of this world, if you will. Um, or is it how I look to other people in the church, other people who claim to be Christians? Or is what's most important to me how I look to Jesus? And how he determines how I look to him is by how I interact with those that he cares about most. So number 3, I'll just leave that there. Number 3, is Jesus suggesting a remedy when we see people causing people to stumble? Sounds good to me. I mean, some of us, when we see people that are causing little children, like literally to stumble, like we're ready to, like we'll help tie the millstone on. I think probably children's pastors fight with that temptation to sin probably a lot more than any others temptations to sin, perhaps. Um, Pastors who really care about the lost, when they see somebody leading them astray, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and we can get angry. I think Christians who care about the lost, care about the people that Jesus cares about, may be tempted to think. But I don't think that's the primary thing. He's not suggesting a remedy. It says, no, he is trying to use how much we care about our lives to put the significance of eternity, I'm having trouble speaking, into perspective. So we care so much about our lives that we can't imagine putting a millstone around our neck. That's like worst case scenario. And so now let's think about how important Jesus thinks eternity is for each and every one of these little ones. And he's trying to help us consider our impact on others, which we are not considering if we are more worried about our own status. How we impact others impacts our status in the kingdom more than anything else, apparently. So what Jesus is continuing the teaching that we started last week by saying what really matters is how we impact others, how we bring people into the circle, whether we cause somebody to stumble and be pushed out of the kingdom, or whether we invite somebody in and help them grow in their faith within the kingdom. Number 4, does Jesus shift gears in verses 8 and 9? What is he talking about now? So that verses 8 and 9 is, if your hand and foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. So it's not switching gears so much. It sounds very similar to the thought about the millstone. But we often think about this in an almost literal way. Jesus is talking about how much more important eternal consequences are than what happens to our physical body. So a lot of times, sort of, we take this, I think, out of context, and we shift to a very literal thinking about my hand and my foot or my eye. And we say, look, if my hand is causing me to stumble, then it should be cut off. And I'm not saying that's even a wrong way to think about this, but I'm not sure it fits in the context. B says, well, most of the time when I've heard this preached or taught, it's not hands and feet that are being suggested might need to be cut off. In fact, I would say in almost every circumstance I've heard this taught, it seems like probably the most difficult temptation that people face in an ongoing way, in a way that seems to continually cause some people to stumble, is sexual immorality. And so I'm kind of beating around the bush a little bit about that. Maybe a lot of times when we read, I know as a young believer for sure, when I read this, I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to have to cut off? Because where is my constant temptation? Where is the place where if I don't get this remedied, I'm going to end up in hell? And if I'm considering eternity, maybe I need to cut something off. But honestly, I got to the place where I realized I'm not sure that would even help. Like, I think our mental tendency toward lust and things like that, I'm not sure it goes away if we cut off body parts. Um, and I'm not sure that fixes the problem. And it was ultimately a spiritual problem. So in a literal way, I think we're getting off track because we're thinking about the best solution. Jesus says, cut things off. Just like the millstone was not a remedy for the problem, also cutting our hands off is not a remedy for the problem. It's not intended as a remedy. It's intended to show us how serious the problem of things that cause us to stumble is, and how seriously we ought to consider the eternal consequences of sin. Now, see, in context, this may be an early instance of the body language that is common in Paul's writing. Maybe he is still talking about how we impact each other within the kingdom of heaven, but I'm the hand or the foot. Okay. I've read this many times, and I believe this is the first time I've considered, and one of the reasons that it bothers me so much when a passage becomes familiar is because when a passage is familiar, we've probably heard it preached on 1,000 times, and how it's been preached on in the past impacts how we now interpret it, and it's really hard for us to read something with fresh eyes. And so I've read this and studied this passage probably hundreds of times, if not more, and I believe I've never considered the thought that he's not shifting to talking about me personally anymore now, but rather he's still talking about the body of Christ and me being the hand that causes somebody to stumble. And I think we can interpret it both ways. I don't think we are wrong in interpreting it because if the purpose is not talking about cutting something off, but the purpose is for us to understand how big a deal it is if we cause somebody to stumble, or if something is causing us to stumble, then it's okay for us to interpret it either way. But in context of this passage, I think I'm the hand or the foot. And if I'm not welcoming somebody in, but instead pushing somebody out, I may be causing them to stumble. Or if I cause them to sin, if I provide temptation in their life, then I'm the one that might not say you're not welcome in the kingdom, but I may have caused somebody to fall out of the circle because sin has caused them to be an outcast and outside the kingdom. So D says, I think we can probably consider both, but Jesus isn't suggesting you cut off your hands or feet or anything else or gouge out your eye. He wants you to see how drastic that seems so that you understand the weight of things or people that cause people to stumble, make them feel unwelcome in the kingdom or of heaven, or even cause them to sin and fall away. So that's the summary of it all. I got parentheses. I almost feel like it's the Amplified Bible there. But anyway, so we're supposed to be thinking about how serious it is to cause somebody to stumble, or if something causes us to stumble. Number 5, do you think you need to take more seriously the things that are causing you to stumble, or how you may be causing others to stumble? Maybe you already take this seriously, but I think probably all of us should be taking it more seriously. And so yes. Um, and how will you respond? I think the question is more specifically how. What is it going to look like for you to take this more seriously? What are you going to do in order to show that you're taking this more seriously? You're not cutting off your hand, but taking drastic measures if that's what it takes to put eternity um, as the focus, as what's more important than your physical well-being now or your status. Um, are you willing to